America is many things to many people. To a 17-year-old kid, it's the malt shop on the corner. To Grandpa, it's the front porch in the cool of the evening. To Mother and her family, it's church on Sunday morning. And to Dad, it's his favorite relaxation. It's the Cracker Barrel philosophers in Crabtree Corners. And it's the tycoons in Wall Street. It's all races, creeds, and religions. It's freedom to work at the job you like. Freedom of speech and to peaceably assemble. Freedom to own property. Security from unlawful search or seizure.
Where's your warrant, Flatfoot?
The right to a speedy and public trial. Protection against cruel punishments and excessive fines. The right to vote. And to worship God in your own way. It is these freedoms that have made America strong.
Okay, so we got our freedom. But management's lousing up everything.
Labor is at fault. It's ruining the country.
My constituents, as your elected representative, I can assure you Labor's right. Management's right. I'm strictly neutral.
Labor, management, politicians, phooey. They can't tell corn from oats.
Work!
Take the money out of
Strike!
Hurry, step right up, folks. Here's the answer to your problems. Dr. Utopia's sensational new discovery, ISM. ISM will cure any ailment of the body politic. It's terrific. It's tremendous. Once you swallow the contents of this bottle, you'll have the bountiful benefit of higher wages, shorter hours, and security. Enormous profits, no strikes. Remember, you're the big boss. Government control, no worry about votes. Name your own salary. Bigger crops, lower costs. Why, ISM even makes the weather perfect every day. And now then, because we are introducing this amazing item for the first time in this country, it isn't going to cost you 1 cent. All you have to do is sign this little scrap of paper, and you get your bottle absolutely free.
I hereby turn over to ISM Incorporated everything I have, including my freedom and the freedom of my children and my children's children, in return for which said ISM promises to take care of me forever.
Get out of the way!
Pardon me.
And who are you, my good man?
I'm John Q. Public.
Ah, my fine friend, you're just in time to share this generous and gigantic offer. Sign right here.
Mind if I read it first?
Hurry up,
Keep your shirts on, boys. Including my freedom. Freedom? Well, sign away my freedom. Why, this is ridiculous.
Don't be corny, brother.
Sure, our system of free enterprise isn't perfect. But before we throw it away for some imported double talk, let's turn the clock back a few years to see what it's done for us. For example, back in the 1890s, Joe Dokes was just a guy who liked to tinker around his barn. Some people thought Joe was lazy. Some even thought he was nuts. But one day, he had an idea. And because he was free to dream his dream and tinker, Joe had a chance to make something of himself and his idea. So, of course, some people didn't think so much of Joe's idea. But that didn't stop him. So Joe got some money from young Aunt Minnie and Uncle Angus and Grandpappy and Mr. Titus. When Joe's friends and relatives used their savings to help him buy tools and property, they were capitalists. Don't blush, folks. It's nothing to be ashamed of. Now, naturally, Joe needed some help. So he hired Willie Lumpkin, who was out of work anyway, and before long, Willie had the know-how and became skilled labor. Because capital, management, and labor worked together, Joe's idea grew. It grew and did things even he never dreamed of. Today, the automobile industry provides millions of jobs that never existed before. And remember, this is a story of only one industry. There are thousands more scattered all over the United States whose history of development is pretty much the same. We've built a country under the American system that sends more young people to high school and college than all the rest of the world combined. Why, even in the Depression, our wages bought more food, clothing, travel, and entertainment than the wages of any other people in the world. Our country has a national income equal to the total national incomes of any other 6 nations in the world. With only 7% of the Earth's people, we drive 70% of the world's automobiles. That's just a sample of the things the capitalistic system has given us in only 160 years. Before signing up, you boys ought to try a little taste of Dr. Ism's formula to see what you'd get in exchange for your freedom. Go ahead, try it.
You can't do this to me! I'll strike!
The state forbids strikes.
Wait till the union hears about this!
Ah, yes, the Union. Welcome to our ranks, number 1313.
I'll take this case to the Supreme Court.
The state is the Supreme Court. Our decision is as follows. No more private property. No more you.
The farm vote will put a stop to this.
Farmers don't vote anymore.
What'll they do for seed next year?
You won't have to worry about next year. The state will do your planning from now on.
We must fight to regain our freedom, or everything is lost. Everything!
Everything is fine. Everything is fine. Everything is fine. Everything is fine. Everything is fine.
When anybody preaches disunity, tries to pit one of us against the other through class warfare, race hatred, or religious intolerance, you know that person seeks to rob us of our freedom and destroy our very lives. And we know what to do about it.
And now, gentlemen, no violence, please. And don't throw those bottles. Don't throw those bottles! No! Oh, no! No! Hey! Oh, oh, hey!
Working together to produce an ever greater abundance of material and spiritual values for all. That is the secret of American prosperity. Joe, the king of the workers of the world.
Hi, folks.
Joe
Joe's the king because he can buy more with his wages than any other worker on the globe. Now, what makes it possible for Joe to earn such a good living? He's no smarter than workers in other countries.
Are you kidding?
He's no stronger than workers in other lands.
Oh, yeah? Well, just watch me.
Just because Joe's an American doesn't mean...
Yeah? Well, being an American is the best thing in the... Oh! My back!
Sure, being an American is great, but how could you be superior to any foreigner when you or your folks might be any one of a dozen different races or religions? So, if you're no Superman, it must be the American way of doing things that makes you the luckiest guy in the world.
I don't think I'm so lucky.
You don't? Well, let me show you.
Hey, what's that gadget? Television?
No, it's a time machine. Just pull that lever. You'll see how people worked 100 years ago.
Hey, this I like.
Oh, that's too far back. Try again. We want to stop at 1850.
Who's the character?
That's your grandfather, Joe.
Oh.
He had to work 69 hours a week to earn a living because he had only inexpensive hand tools and his own strength to help him make things. Your grandfather was a powerful man, yet his strength equaled only 1/10 of a horsepower. You have hundreds of horsepower in this costly giant of a machine to multiply your strength and efficiency 1,000 times. This makes it possible for you to earn more than any worker in history. And still have leisure time each day to enjoy life.
So I'm lucky. But what about the rich guy who does nothing while I do the work?
True, there are rich people who contribute nothing. And there are poor people who contribute the same. But most of the invested capital that buys the tools you use comes from your fellow Americans. 40 million of us have money in the banks. 70 million of us own insurance policies. Over 15 million of us invest savings in corporation stocks and bonds, which help to finance industry. Each year, the people of America invest billions of dollars to create new plants and equipment. This invested capital buys the tools which make a man's labor worth more because he produces more. In China, for example, where there is practically no capital available for investment in plants or tools, a man's labor is not worth very much. A coolie takes 10 days to move 10 gallons of kerosene 100 miles at a freight cost of 10 cents a gallon. An American railroad worker takes only 2 hours to move 100,000 gallons of kerosene 100 miles at a freight cost of 1 cent a gallon. The coolie makes 10 cents a day. An average American railroad worker makes $10 a day, or 100 times more than the coolie. The average railroad worker has the benefit of a $20,000 investment in equipment. The Chinese coolie's equipment is worth only 10 cents. With constant improvement in expensive tools and the skill to use them, the value of any man's labor can be multiplied many times. Naturally, the people in this country who invest their savings with industry expect dividends. No dividends, no investments. Without new capital each year to finance new plants, tools, and equipment, labor and management would soon find themselves in pretty bad shape.
Yeah, without capital to buy new tools, I might not do so good. But look what a new invention did to my grandpa. For 25 years, he knocks his brains out in the wagon works. Then along comes the gas buddy. Need I tell you what happened to Grandpop?
The history of our country proves that new inventions create thousands of jobs for everyone they displace. So it wasn't long before your grandfather had a better job, at more pay for less work. Our industrial progress is largely the result of the competitive struggle between companies to capture the market to increase profits. Huge sums are spent each year to make a better product to sell for less. Yet, regardless of how much money is spent to develop a new idea, there is often failure. When research proves successful, everyone shares in the accomplishment. The business which fails to give the consumer as much value as a competitor gives often goes bankrupt. However, on a national scale, competition gives the greatest good to the greatest number by continually producing more and better goods at lower prices. The American way of doing things makes it possible for more people to own their own homes. We're only 7% of the world's population, but we have 50% of the radios. We have 54% of the world's telephones. Americans own practically all the refrigerators in existence to give them plenty of ice quickly and easily. Bathtubs, we've got 92% of them. Most of us have the leisure time to enjoy the peace and quiet of the beautiful countryside as we drive about in 72% of the world's automobiles.
I told you to turn at the last corner. You don't eat it. You eat it. I know. I want to get candy bar.
Under the protection of our freedoms, American labor, management, and capital, the greatest production team in the history of mankind, have made the United States the industrial master of the world. Capital must continue to provide industry with the funds to create new tools and plants. Labor and management must continue to increase the production of better goods at lower prices so that more people will be able to buy the things that make life easier and happier for all of us. Then Joe will continue to be the king of the workers of the world.
You said it, brother.
It is a blueprint for world revolution. Red China's battle plan. Divide and encircle. Conquer and enslave. This film tells how it all came about. China ceased to dominate various territories, which included 3.5 million square miles, an area equal in size to 3 Indias, or almost all of Europe. Never in history had a major independent nation lost so much sovereignty and suffered so much humiliation. Entering the 20th century, China is a backward nation ruled by an autocratic system of emperors and kings. Her people are restless. They want a change. They demand new leadership. They find both in Dr. Sun Yat-sen, the George Washington of China, who leads a people's revolution in 1911 that overthrows the corrupt Manchu dynasty. Dr. Sun's attempts to establish democracy in China are hampered by reactionaries, restorationists, warlords. And amid the chaos and unrest, the Chinese Communist Party is born. Mao Zedong attends the founding conference in 1921. A man of the soil, he believes that the ultimate power in China belongs to the peasants, who make up 80% of the nation's population. And so, says Mao Zedong, China's communist revolution must begin in the rural areas and sweep over the cities. Chiang Kai-shek, succeeding Sun Yat-sen, works with the communists at first, but in 1927 he purges them from his government. Chiang's armies are able to drive the red troops into the mountains, but he can never wipe them out. And in 1934, Mao Zedong undertakes his long march in search of sanctuary in the remote province of Shenxi, in the caves of Yan'an. It is as if an army had been ordered to march on foot 6,000 miles through hostile territory in 1 year. Following a tortuous roundabout route, the communists cross 18 mountain ranges, some of them higher than the European Alps. In the beginning, there are 180,000 marchers in the communist caravan, curling across the hills and plains of China for 50 miles and more. Casualties are enormous. 3/4 of the marchers die en route. But the survivors press on, and when they reach their mountain sanctuary, Mao himself is on hand to salute and welcome them. He is and has been throughout the long march in full command. There are only a few thousand communists in the caves of Yan'an, but from this humble beginning, their influence will grow and multiply, reach out and conquer. The communists ideologically are constantly on the attack, denouncing the nationalist government and Chiang Kai-shek. And Mao does something no military leader in China has done before. He sends his soldiers into the fields to work beside the peasants, to help them, and to talk to them of the new China, the communist China, in which landlords will be made to give up their farms to the peasants. Propaganda teams travel the countryside. Dancers perform morality plays in which the landlords are the devils and the communists are the forces of righteousness, trampling their class enemy. Chiang Kai-shek is aware of the growing pro-communist sentiment in China. He realizes that it is a threat as great, if not greater, than the aggressive ambitions of the Japanese. For Chiang and for nationalist China, the sands of time are running out. And yet, the nation, her cities, and her people reflect little of the uneasiness, unrest, uncertainty that cast their shadows from within and without. Shanghai, 1937. The blow falls. Japan strikes. When Chiang Kai-shek is forced into war with Japan, when China must fight for her life, the communists are given representation in a coalition government. Mao Zedong makes his real aims very clear.
We are fighting 70% for self-development, 20% for compromise, 10% against Japan.
As the Sino-Japanese War goes on, Mao is promoted in Chinese Communist propaganda as a popular anti-Japanese patriot. Wherever and however the Red troops move into battle, they spread the glory of Mao Zedong and the greatness of the communist cause. On their backs, they carry posters and slogans as they march through the countryside. When the war ends in 1945, Mao's guerrillas have grown from 40,000 to 1 million. The enemy from without has been conquered, but within, the fight has just begun. For post-war China is a nation exhausted by battle. People eat grass. Misery and hunger are deeply etched on the land and on the people. This is the time for Mao Zedong to launch his so-called War of National Liberation. Communist forces have been strengthened by the acquisition of captured Japanese weapons and ammunition, stockpiled in Manchuria and seized with Russian assistance. Mao's strategy is based on a protracted war, a war that will weaken the nationalists as the communists grow stronger.
Enemy advances, we retreat. Enemy camps, we harass. Enemy tires, we attack. Enemy retreats, we pursue.
Time and again, Chiang Kai-shek's stronger, better equipped army units find themselves fighting an elusive, shadowy enemy that melts into the mountains. And in the midst of battle, communist soldiers harangue the nationalists, calling on Chiang's troops, often with great effect, to desert to the communist side. Mao Zedong's self-proclaimed War of National Liberation is a series of battles of annihilation.
Injuring all of a man's 10 fingers is not as effective as chopping off one, and routing 10 enemy divisions is not as effective as annihilating one of them.
Mao's conquest of mainland China begins with his guerrillas gaining control of the rural areas. Then the cities are surrounded and isolated, engulfed and defeated. Blueprint for conquest is succeeding just as planned. All along, Mao woos the intellectuals, the middle force in China, with talk of a coalition government, a united front, a new democracy. But Mao's promises of popular representation only mask the communist leader's real intentions. Finally, all of mainland China is swallowed up by the so-called liberation movement, and 1/4 of the world's population is brought under communist control. But on Formosa, renamed Taiwan, more than 10 million Chinese remain free. Chiang Kai-shek has escaped and set up a Republic of China government in opposition to the communists. Chiang signs a mutual defense treaty with the United States and vows one day to liberate captive China. Beiping, on October 1st, 1949, Mao Zedong proclaims the birth of the People's Republic of China. In Communist China, with the War of National Liberation won, Mao Zedong reveals to the world that he is no gentle agrarian reformer. In the first 5 years of the People's Republic, at least 800,000 anti-communists, by Mao's own admission, are tried and executed. Millions more die from local excesses, from imprisonment, from assignment to so-called labor reform units. In foreign affairs, Mao becomes increasingly militant. And in Korea in 1950, Communist China and the free world come into conflict when South Korea is invaded by Communist forces from North Korea. The United Nations Security Council is convened in emergency session in New York, and the members vote to send troops into combat to help defend the independence and sovereignty of South Korea. In December 1950, the Red Chinese intervene on the side of North Korea. For 2.5 years, the UN and communist troops fight and fall in Korea. The United Nations forces hold, and in July 1953 at Panmunjom, an armistice is signed, fixing boundary lines much as they were when the invasion began. General William Harrison signs for the United Nations. General Nam Il accepts the agreement for North Korea. As the communist Chinese troops withdraw and return to their homeland, Mao Zedong claims a momentous victory over the free world. Mao tells the world,
"The United States is a paper tiger."
Immediately after the establishment of the People's Republic, all is harmony between the Chinese dragon and the Russian bear. Moscow rolls out the red carpet for the visitor from Peking. And it is not long before the two giants of the communist world, controlling together more than 1 billion lives, sign a 30-year treaty of friendship, alliance, and assistance. Each country promises not to join in any coalition against the other, and both agree to consult regularly on matters of mutual concern. But in 1956, the dragon and the bear come into conflict as Nikita Khrushchev denounces Joseph Stalin, Mao Zedong's longtime idol. When the Russian premier proposes a policy of peaceful coexistence with the free world, Red China attacks Khrushchev and the Soviet Union as traitors to the basic doctrine of world revolution. As the years go by, the rift grows wider. In 1963, Russia, the United States, and Great Britain agree on an historic treaty banning nuclear testing in the atmosphere, outer space, and underwater. The treaty, the increasing contact and communications between Russia and the free world, reflect the Soviet leadership's growing concern with internal problems and so-called peaceful coexistence as a better way than force to spread communism around the world. Dean Rusk signs for the United States. Andrei Gromyko for the Soviet Union. And Alexander Douglas Hume for Great Britain. Red China denounces Moscow's new line and sets out to become the leader of world communism. generations of leadership change as years pass. Peking may change its militant position. But today, Communist China seeks to spread its own brand of global revolution. Mao's emissaries are sent into the underdeveloped nations of the world, the so-called rural areas. Red technicians arrive in Havana, seeking a foothold in the Caribbean, a satellite in the Western Hemisphere. Raul Castro, Fidel's younger brother, travels behind the bamboo curtain to be greeted and decorated by Chinese military officials. In Europe, Red China wins a satellite in tiny Albania. And in talks and meetings, the Red leaders preach their gospel of world revolution through people's wars of national liberation. Satellite nations are emphatically reminded of Mao's admonition.
Political power grows out of the barrel of a gun.
In Africa, Ghana and its leader, Kwame Nkrumah, received special... On state visits, the Ghanaian president is greeted by Zhou Enlai as Peking seeks to spread its influence throughout Africa. In Asia, the Chinese Communist regime seeks to become a friend and ally of Pakistan. Zhou Enlai, Peking's apostle of world revolution, as he meets with President Ayub Khan. In alliances and agreements with Indonesia and other nations, Red China adheres to Mao Zedong's creed of conquest.
The Marxist-Leninist principles of revolution hold good universally for China, all the other countries of the world.
Red China's battle plan is spelled out in specific detail in an article written by Lin Biao, Vice Chairman of the Chinese Communist Party and Minister of Defense. Long live the victory of People's War is the title of the article. And its 18,000 words are directed toward the ultimate and absolute defeat of the free world. Victory for communism will come, says Lin Biao, through wars of national liberation. Country by country, continent by continent. Lin Biao's blueprint for world revolution follows Mao Zedong's classic conquest of China, dividing the world as a nation is divided into cities and rural areas. In this Red Chinese battle plan, North America and Western Europe are the cities of the world, and Asia, Africa, Central America, and South America, the rural areas. With revolutions such as the war in Vietnam organized everywhere, there will be, says Lin Biao, a tide of opposition to the free world. And the imperialists, the reactionaries, the Khrushchev revisionists will be swept from the stage of history. The struggle of the Viet Cong, adds Lin Biao, is now the focus of the struggle of the people of the world. The communists are waging a guerrilla war patterned after Mao Zedong's War of National Liberation. In Vietnam, as in China 2 decades ago, communists seek to dominate the countryside until the dense thicket of communism surrounds, entangles, and finally chokes the cities. And the Viet Cong fight with guerrilla tactics tested and perfected by Mao Zedong.
Use any technique of terror subversion, treachery that will harass and cripple the enemy.
And so civilian prisoners are bound and chained and slaughtered by the Viet Cong. Peking is careful to assert that revolutions cannot be important. But, says Lin Biao, that does not exclude support for revolutionary peoples in their struggles. Thus does militant communist China and Mao Zedong see the day when Peking becomes the ideological center of a world enslaved. But in many countries, the Red Chinese battle plan has failed. In Ghana, Kwame Nkrumah, good friend and faithful ally of Mao Zedong, is today a fallen idol, a deposed ruler, a man without a country. In Indonesia, anti-communist riots shake the country and students storm the Red Chinese embassy. Sukarno is no longer the absolute ruler of the island empire. In the Caribbean, communist China suffers still another setback. Fidel Castro turns his back on Peking and sends Red China's technicians home, denouncing all but Castro's own brand of communism. In Asia, nations large and small stand together, strong, alert. Determined to respond to wars of aggression that deny people the chance to decide their own destiny. Striving for peace. Striving for a world in which nations live by law and reason, not by threats and destruction. In a world of so-called cities and rural areas, the emerging nations and industrial countries are today partners in progress, building together for peace. The cities, the fortunate nations of the world, are bringing to the rural areas, the poorer nations, the skills and assistance needed to help them and their people build and create a better life. For this generation and those to come, carrying on a tradition of hope and the dignity of man, a conviction born long ago, far away. When this bell rang out the news that a new nation was born, a new truth proclaimed, that man is born to be and to remain forever free.
When our founding fathers established this republic, they created a political and economic system unique among nations, a system which has led the United States to the very pinnacle in wealth and in world leadership. This series of programs is being presented to help all of us understand better our advantages under our American way of life.
For today's topic, let's join now a group of young people at the National Education Program Workshop in Searcy, Arkansas. At the classroom lectern is Dr. Clifton L. Gaines, Jr., noted young historian.
We're discussing today one of the most precious gifts on earth, American citizenship. American citizenship is a combination of freedom and responsibilities. The privileges of freedom come to us as a heritage from many generations of pioneering Americans. The responsibilities must be developed by each new generation, by each individual citizen. Some of you may be asking yourselves, Why should we be bothered with developing citizenship responsibilities? Well, there are many reasons. One of the primary reasons is that great principles do not live from generation to generation without being nurtured, without being kept vigorously alive. Unless we understand and work effectively for the principles upon which our American way of life is founded, the structure will crumble and our heritage of freedom will perish. Another primary reason for the development of citizenship responsibility is that we are living in an era marked by the growth of socialism. To a substantial degree, in one form or another, socialism has spread the shadow of human regimentation over most of the nations of the earth, and the shadow is encroaching upon our own liberty. A third major reason for accepting our citizenship responsibilities and working at them is the presence within America of socialist and communist propagandists dedicated to the establishment of a new order. The communist fifth columnists among us are working for world dictatorship. To accomplish this, their strategy is to undermine the confidence of our people in the American system and the principles on which it stands. The socialists among us seek to bring about a gradual change in our system by gradually destroying the principle of the private ownership of property and substituting the socialist principle of government ownership. Now let's be practical for a moment. Is the American way of life worth bothering about? That is, with a viewpoint of self-interest. Well, let's see. We know that under the stars and stripes we have more freedom than do civilized people on earth. Our freedom stems from the fact that America is a republic, founded on a constitution, and dedicated to the principle of democracy and the worth of the individual. The people rule. But some philosophers tell us that the way to a man's heart is through his stomach. In other words, food, the material things of life, are dear to the heart. Let's look briefly at the material blessings of America. Our nation, although containing only 6% of the land area and 7% of the population of the world, produces 42% of the world's wealth. We know that the average American in all walks of life has a living standard twice as high as the best in Europe, where socialism is widespread, and from 5 to 10 times better than in the communist countries, such as Russia and China. And if we remember our previous lessons, we know that this economic abundance is possible in America because incentives for progress and the other factors built into our dynamic private enterprise system have enabled us to utilize our resources to the fullest extent. So we do have good sound reasons, both abstractly and in self-interest, for developing citizenship responsibilities toward safeguarding the basic principles of our way of life. But let's put the full challenge in a few words. The world is caught in an era of socialist expansion. Most of the nations are affected, and America is a target. In fact, the #1 target of both the socialist and the communist. If we permit our great system to crumble through the apathy of our citizenship, we shall lose not only our freedom, but our prosperity and our still brighter future. What then must we do as citizens? What are our obligations of citizenship? #1, to understand the American way of life and what makes it tick. For instance, we should understand that our form of government is a republic, not a pure democracy. And we should clearly understand the difference. Who can tell us the difference in a few words?
A pure democracy establishes majority rule with a minority overrun.
Yes, it does. On the other hand, our republic is based on a constitution which protects minority rights.
In our republic, we have representative government, not sheer majority rule.
And isn't its authority divided into 3 branches, the executive, legislative, and judicial?
Yes, it is. And it's important, too, that in our republic, authority is surrounded by an ingenious system of checks and balances that prevents autocratic or dictatorial rule. That is, if we maintain the Constitution as our basic law. Well, that briefly sums up our political structure. What about our economic structure?
Our economic system is based on 3 major principles: private ownership of property, the profit motive, and the competitive open market.
Yes, those are the three great pillars. Private ownership diffuses the wealth and economic power over the very widest area, over our whole population, and makes our people independent, masters of their own lives. The profit motive, as we have learned, is active in all human behavior. In our economic system, the profit motive is the incentive for new development and constantly expanding production. And the open competitive market is where the consumer is king. It is this factor in our economy which brings about better goods and lower prices, as one company after another tries to outdo its competitors and get the consumer's business. These are some of the basic facts about our own system which every citizen should know. But now let us go on to additional obligations of American citizenship. Number 2, to understand communism, its basic godless philosophy, its goal of world conquest, its insidious tactics, and its cunning strategy. Number 3 on our list of obligations is to understand socialism and all the cunning disguises in which it presents itself to the American people. Our 4th obligation is to understand propaganda techniques as used by both the communist and the socialist. This is a very vitally important need. Thousands of good, loyal Americans have been duped into actually aiding the communist, simply because they did not look carefully before they joined some high-sounding venture, or before they more or less blindly advocated some course of action. Number 5 in the list of American citizenship obligations is to take an interest in your public schools and in your private and public-financed colleges, to take an interest in what's being taught and how it's being taught, and to take an interest in the welfare of the teachers who contribute so much to the development of America. Number 6, in addition to voting in all elections, become active in government. Run for local, state, and national office, or help select capable people of the highest integrity to serve. Be constantly vocal on all local and national political issues. Tell your representatives in Congress, or even the President himself, what you think is the best course on issues that come before the public. Number 7, strive constantly for spiritual growth. We, as individuals, can push the world along toward mankind's highest destiny if each of us will make the welfare of his fellow man his first concern, and if each of us will apply the principles of God's truth to our political and economic affairs. And lastly, obligation number 8. Dedicate a part of your everyday life to the bringing of these requirements of American citizenship to the attention of fellow students, fellow workers, neighbors, and friends. Is it too much to ask that we fulfill these obligations of citizenship? If we think so, we should read again the history of the founding of this nation and consider the hardships of the people who made possible our freedom. They felt that no challenge was too great if freedom was at stake. That spirit carried them on. It created for us the foundation of our great heritage. We have seen it flare up and burn brightly in every national emergency, on the battlefields and at home. The socialists, the communists, and their followers would like to see the American spirit extinguished. If each of us will rise to the occasion, if every citizen, young and old, will accept the challenge of his citizenship, then the socialist and communist and their followers will not prevail, and America will go on toward the fulfillment of her great world destiny. This concludes the American Adventure Series. Our next series of classes in the American way of life will be announced soon. For now, class dismissed.
The American Adventure Series is a production of the National Education Program, Searcy, Arkansas. Dr. George S. Benson, director. Dr. Clifton L. Gaines, Jr. was our instructor. This is a continuing series based on the unique political and economic system which has made America great. Watch for the next presentation of the American Adventure.
beautiful for spacious skies, o'er the waves of
When our founding fathers established this republic, they created a political and economic system unique among nations, a system which has led the United States to the very pinnacle in wealth and in world leadership. This series of programs is being presented to help all of us understand better our advantages under our American way of life.
For today's topic, let's join now a group of young people at the National Education Program Workshop in Searcy, Arkansas. At the classroom lectern is Dr. Clifton L. Gaines, Jr., noted young historian.
In our American Adventure series, we have frequently noted that the three great foundation stones of the American way of life are faith in God, constitutional government, and the private ownership economic system. When combined, they give us the structure from which has evolved a unique mechanism for human progress, for personal happiness, and for economic well-being. What about this mechanism that we call the American system? What makes it work? Why does it produce such good results for its people, vastly better than any other system? To answer these questions, let us trace the functions of the American economic freedoms right down into the life stream of our workaday life. Any list of human freedoms might well have up near the top the freedom to work at the occupation or calling of one's own choice. We have this freedom in America. How well does it work? Well, some of you college students are preparing yourselves for careers as teachers. You wouldn't want the government or anyone else to force you to take up some other occupation. You want to choose your own careers. All Americans have this free choice of occupation. We see nothing strange or even unique in this freedom, but the people of many other countries think it is an amazing thing. Under socialism, there is an overall central economic plan drawn up and enforced by the government. The plan calls for the production of so much of this and that product and assigns so many workers. Chances are that sooner or later in a socialist country, you would be shifted to an occupation or a locality which you would not like. England's socialist leaders promised that there would be no regimentation or control of the workers. And yet, soon after socialism took over the English industries, the socialists enacted a law which provided government control over everybody's choice of occupation. Our freedom of choice in occupation makes it possible for Americans to enjoy their labor, which is a factor in our high productivity and our high living standard. An Iowa farmer who visited several weeks in Russia came home to report that production per worker on the collective farms in Russia amounted to approximately 1/10 as much as that on American farms. He also reported that it requires 2 months' labor for a Russian worker to earn enough money to buy a suit of clothes. A much better suit of clothing can be purchased by an average American worker with less than a week's earnings. Another American freedom that has an important economic influence is the freedom to dream dreams that may come true. Only in an atmosphere of freedom can the total brain capacity of an entire nation be harnessed to progress. Some of the most valuable contributions to our progress have been made by average Americans who put their brains to work in a country where everyone is free and even encouraged to try out any idea or contraption, no matter how crazy it may seem to others. It was this stimulating freedom that permitted Thomas Edison to envision and develop electric lights. Even though electricity had been in the presence of mankind for 6,000 years, no one had learned how to make an electric light until Edison, a below-average student from an obscure family, evolved the idea and succeeded in making it work. Millions of products have come to the American market in the last half-century. And behind each new product, there has been a free mind, dreaming, exploring, inquiring, probing and creating. Our system inspires dreams and challenges 160 million people to dream, and thus to create, to produce, and to build. Closely allied to and complementing the freedom to dream is the freedom to compete. Under our American system, the dreamer does not have a monopoly on producing things. Anyone can go into business and compete with him. Since the first automobile was produced in America, over 1,500 companies have been organized to manufacture automobiles. Most of them failed. The best competitors, the best producers succeeded. Competition has kept each auto manufacturer busy trying to outdo the other and attract more car buyers. Hundreds of millions of dollars have been invested in research and new manufacturing techniques to make today's car far ahead of the earlier models. What has happened in the automobile industry has happened also with the whole vast array of products on the American market. Another vital factor in the American production mechanism is the freedom to advance, the freedom of each person to improve his own position. Most of the present-day industrial leaders have come up through the ranks of employees. They were ambitious, enterprising, industrious, and free to work for advancement. American competition, along with our freedom to advance, has developed the finest industrial and business management in the world. American management goes through a process of screening by competition. Incompetent management cannot survive the keen competition of our free market. Only the most capable, the most efficient, the most productive can remain at the top. This screened management means better jobs and a more secure future for employees and better products at less cost for the consuming public. The final factor in America's great economic progress is the freedom to invest. Not only is it the privilege of every American to invest his savings as he sees fit, but the incentive to invest is very great. This is evidenced by the fact that some 18 million Americans own corporation stock. The money they invest in industry is used for working capital, for building and expanding plants, and for the constant development of industrial tools. One of the most dramatic differences between an American industrial employee and his European and Asian counterpart is his tools. Where there is little capital for investment in plants and tools, a man's labor is not worth very much. This man, for instance, takes 10 days to move 10 gallons of kerosene 100 miles at a freight cost of 10 cents a gallon. An American railroad worker takes only 2 hours to move 100,000 gallons of kerosene 100 miles at a freight cost of 1 cent a gallon. The coolie makes 10 cents a day. The average American railroad worker makes $10 to $15 a day. The American railroad worker has the benefit of a $20,000 investment in equipment, and the coolie's equipment is worth only 10 cents. Better tools are being produced constantly in all phases of American industry, resulting in higher productivity per worker, in better wages, and in improved products for the consuming public. When our grandfathers were boys, animals were doing 79% of the work in American production. Men contributed 15%, while machine power contributed about 6%. The output per worker at that time was about 27 cents per hour. Hours were long and wages were low, and production was meager. Today, in contrast, animals are no longer a production factor, except on a few farms. Men are contributing about 5% in American productivity, while machines are contributing 95% or more. The output per worker has multiplied many times, and wages have kept pace, largely through America's tremendous investment in industrial tools. For instance, it takes from $15,000 to $18,000 in invested capital to create each job in the chemical industry, $35,000 in the petroleum industry, and so on. Throughout our entire industrial system, there is an average investment of more than $10,000 per job. These 5 factors combine to make the American economic system the most productive in history, giving the American people a far higher standard of living than that enjoyed by any other nation. And let us be reminded that the key word in each is freedom. Freedom to work, freedom to dream, freedom to compete, freedom to advance, and freedom to invest in the tools of production. This has been the formula for our unparalleled achievement, the secret of our great national progress and our individual well-being. But let us remember that these freedoms are all in one bundle, and that if one should be withdrawn or should become inactive, then our freedom structure would be weakened and jeopardized. All Americans should clearly understand how each freedom works in our system, and how vital each one is to our economic welfare and our happiness. Next week, we shall discuss the functions of profit in America's progress. But for now, class dismissed.
The American Adventure Series is a production of the National Education Program, Searcy, Arkansas. Dr. George S. Benson, director. Dr. Clifton L. Gaines, Jr. was our instructor. This is a continuing series based on the unique political and economic system which has made America great. Watch for the next presentation of The American Adventure.